Cool. Anything else I can help you folks with? We're all feeling okay? Terrific. There we go.
Sounds like a printer worked.
You think so? I have become quite a techie rabbi.
Yeah.
What a world. All right, in a second, I'm gonna start our recording and the transcript, and I'm gonna let all of these nice people in. And we're really grateful for your help, friends. This is a really nice thing. So thank you.
It's an honor to be a part of this. So thank you, Rabbi Green and David, for organizing.
And Linda.
It takes a minute to unmute.
Linda.
Sorry. I was saying thank you, but you couldn't hear me. It's a pleasure.
We're glad you're here.
Fantastic.
Next year in person.
That's right.
Second or third or fourth or whichever number I am, it feels like an honor to be here.
Well, that's awesome. Grateful. All right. Recording. Hello, friends. Welcome. We're so glad to have you with us. We are going to take a few minutes and just let everybody in. We have lots of people who will be joining us. So we'll just give it a couple of minutes so people can sign in and turn on their audio, and we're glad that you all are here. Welcome. You have a choice whether you want to see us for the moment in, if you want to see us in the gallery view or in the speaker view. Once we have our speakers start, we'll turn it all into a spotlight, so you'll be able to see who the main speakers are. And we're just going to give this a moment. We did turn on the transcript function, so if that is helpful to you, please do select that you can turn it on, and you can turn it off your screens while it's still available for others. So if that is a helpful resource, we hope that you will select it. We're grateful for all of you who are attending. In classic rabbinic ways, I'm going to keep talking until we're ready to start. That's what clergy do. It's how we were trained. If you would like to write into the chat, introduce yourself, where you're from, we'll be glad to welcome you. People are starting to sign on.
But I can assure you, when I got here in 2000.
Hello from.
Oh. Sorry, I muted somebody. We'll give a few more moments, and then we can begin. Lovely. Nice to see people introducing themselves in the chat. My name is Fred Green. I'm the rabbi at Congregation Har Hashem here in Boulder. I know that we have folks coming in from lots of different places around Colorado and beyond Colorado. And this is our community's effort with the help and support of David and Linda Backrack to create a symposium on spirituality and the environment. We've been doing it for a few years now, and we're delighted to bring some friends together again today. Our conversation is going to be on food justice and faith, nourishing our bodies and souls. And this is a really important topic and something that we're here to learn more about together, no matter where we're from, what our faith or spiritual backgrounds might be, a time where we can find some common ground together. And we're really just delighted that you all are here with us. I'm going to ask David Backrack to share some thoughts and reflections and a message before we begin.
Thank you, Rabbi Green. Linda and I welcome you to the 6th annual Symposium on Spirituality and the Environment. This year, our program will address food justice and faith, nourishing our bodies and our souls. We have 3 wonderful speakers, and following their remarks, there will be a panel discussion, and then you are invited to join them in one of the 3 breakout sessions that will run until about 12:30. Rabbi Green will explain how to get into the breakout sessions after the panel discussion. When I was in college, I was reading about the Native American experience and was struck by a Native American proverb that read, "We did not inherit the earth from our ancestors. Rather, we are borrowing it from our grandchildren." The Glasgow Conference on Climate Change just ended yesterday. Important issues were discussed, and apparently some commitments were made by many of the 190 plus countries that were attending. I hope that substantive action leading to meaningful change, not just talk and empty promises, will follow for the benefit of my grandchildren, of our grandchildren, and their grandchildren, and so on and so on. Linda and I first came to this area 50 years ago. We fell in love with Boulder and Colorado. We promised ourselves then that someday we would return. And we did, more than 23 years ago. We were drawn to Boulder, not just for its visual beauty, but because of a deep spiritual feeling that overcame us, that this really is someplace special. We could feel it in our hearts. We are here on this land in Boulder, Colorado, not because it was given to us by our ancestors, but rather because our predecessors took it from its rightful owners. I ask that you join me in acknowledging those indigenous peoples who were here first, whose presence on this land can be traced back 13,000 years to the Arapaho and the Cheyenne peoples who drew their sustenance from this very land on which we live today, land that we took from them in a most regrettable fashion. We honor their memories, we honor their descendants, and we promise to be good stewards of this very special place we call home. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, David. We appreciate your opening words and that acknowledgement. I think that is actually the first time for our synagogue community that we've formally done so, and I believe it's going to be a tradition that we continue to return to. So thank you. I want to ask Rabbi Deborah Bronstein to share an opening prayer. Rabbi Bronstein is our Rabbi Emerita. And so if you will unmute yourself, Rabbi Bronstein, and so that we can hear and see you.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi Green. I am always worried that I'll choose the wrong words for this invocation. And today is no different. But I found a beautiful poem that reads like a prayer to me and has to do with sustenance that I thought I'd share. And it's called Mornings at Blackwater, and it's by Mary Oliver. For years, every morning, I drank from Blackwater Pond. It was flavored with oak leaves and also, no doubt, the feet of ducks. It always assuaged me from the dry bowl of the very far past. What I want to say is that the past is the past, and the present is what your life is, and you are capable of choosing what that will be. So come to the pond, or to the river of your imagination, or to the harbor of your longing, and put your lips to the world and live your life. And I pray that at this time, especially as we're thinking about the Glasgow hearings and the future, that we put our lips to the world and live our lives.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi. We're always grateful for your presence and for your sharing. Amen, amen. I'm going to ask before we move to our first speakers, if you would like to, and the chat has been enabled, if you would like to share who you are, if you haven't already, and where you're from, or an organization or a congregation that you might be connected to, we would all be glad to welcome you and get to see who is a part of this symposium and assembly. This conversation about food justice and faith nourishing our bodies and our souls is meant to spur conversation. It is designed to give us a chance to learn together, to share together, and hopefully at the end of this to figure out how we can build some connections and move forward together and build something together. As a rabbi, I think back to sacred texts in my tradition, and looking at the book of Deuteronomy, we see this text that will say over and over again that when we pass through and pick our harvest and whatever it is that we might need, we have to leave some for others. We can't take all of it just for ourselves. We have to leave it, the text will say, for the stranger, for the orphan, and for the widow. And that has always been symbolic messages for those who are vulnerable among us. And then it will say that we were slaves in Egypt. We too have been vulnerable, even if we landed, if we became a landed people. And if I was to take that text and think about where we are today, I think there's lots of us who are fortunate and I hope are grateful for our good fortune, but that responsibility never leaves us to make sure that people have access to good, healthy food, that we respond to hunger, and that we can be good stewards of a planet that doesn't exactly belong to all of us, even if we have certain property rights. I'm a big believer in a shared responsibility, and because of that responsibility, that's how we find our rights. The rights don't necessarily come first. It's our shared and mutual responsibility. So with all of that said, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Becca Gunn Levy. She is the Farm and Sustainability Director at the Boulder Jewish Community Center, the JCC. She runs the Milk and Honey Farm, an educational, sustainable farm which brings the community together for experiential programs and activities grounded in Jewish heritage, tradition, and values. The farm provides a place for individuals to connect on the simplest level with soil, plants, animals, and each other. She has a master's in agriculture, food, and the environment from Tufts University, a certificate in ecological horticulture from UC Santa Cruz, has studied at the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies in Israel, and is an alum of Adama, the Jewish Environmental Fellowship, when she's not at Milk and Honey Farm. You can find her mothering 3 young children, striving to be a loving partner, or taking her dog on a trail run. So Becca, we're glad that you are here. And if you'll unmute yourself, we will begin our program, and I'm going to set up your slides.
Thank you so much. It's a big honor to be here today. And it's great to see all the participants. I know a lot of you know some of your names. Some of you I don't know. So here I am getting to speak with you this morning. I love winter squash and pumpkins. Winter squash grows all season long, from May through September, and it's harvested at the end of the growing season for storage and eating throughout the winter, hence the name winter squash. Though for culinary purposes and nutritionally, winter squash is considered a vegetable, botanically it is a fruit. It is the fruiting body of the annual squash plant, the fruit forming a caloric and highly nutritious protective outer shell for the plant's seeds. Its color can range from yellow to green, to gray and pink, even a dusky blue. Some weigh only a half a pound. Some bigger eating varieties that we grew this year weigh close to 30 pounds. And we've all seen pumpkins entering pumpkin contests. This year, the Guinness World Record for the biggest pumpkin was broken in Italy, with a pumpkin weighing in at 2,702 pounds. Since moving to Colorado in 2014, I have hosted a winter squash party each year at the end of the season to celebrate the rich diversity of fruits and culinary creations we can make from them. This year's Squash Fest was last weekend. We gathered with friends and family and tasted everyone's culinary contributions, including butternut squash, vegan mac and cheese, kale salad with candy roaster cubes, an Afghan pumpkin dish, sesame pumpkin pie, pumpkin chocolate chip cookies, and more. This time of year between Halloween and Thanksgiving, you probably all have a favorite dish that you make with pumpkin or squash. I invite you now to write in the chat what you would have contributed to a party potluck dedicated to this delicious vegetable. So go ahead, tell me what you would have brought. Some more cookies, a soup. Ooh, a chiffon pie, pumpkin cornbread, squash mushroom soup. Amazing, friends. Thank you all for sharing. We should maybe do a recipe exchange after this. Today, I'll be talking about how we can use spiritual knowledge to inspire personal and collective change to build a more resilient and just food system. When preparing for my talk this morning, I realized that following the growth of winter squash may well prove to tie together and ground this broad topic. Let's first start by defining some terms. When we talk about the food system, we mean all factors involved with getting food produced to our mouths and disposed of. It starts with agricultural production and involves markets, transportation, processing, food preparation, consumption, disposal. What does it mean for the food system to be resilient? According to Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, resilience is the ability to prepare for, withstand, and recover from a crisis or disruption. A resilient food system is able to withstand and recover from disruptions in a way that ensures a sufficient supply of acceptable and accessible food for all. This is a great definition, but I think it would be more useful and powerful if it also included justice. For a food system to be resilient, it needs to also be a food system that prioritizes food justice to make sure that the food system is truly serving the people. According to Just Food, food justice is communities exercising their right to grow, sell, and eat healthy food. Healthy food is fresh, nutritious, affordable, culturally appropriate, and grown locally with care for the well-being of the land, workers, and animals. Our food system needs to serve each community member, whether or not we're in crisis. It should be built upon valuing the earth, animals, and people it serves. So how do we build a just and resilient food system? That's a really big question with many answers. We have to make changes in all facets of the food system, from production to markets to consumption and waste disposal. Building a resilient food system is going to come from all of us making personal change and coming together to enact systemic change. When making decisions about how to eat and how to spend our tax money, we need to prioritize the health of each other and the land, reduce our food miles and packaging, and work together toward building a stronger community. Building resilience in a food system is so important right now because the warming climate is causing disruptions everywhere. The climate crisis is one of the biggest systemic challenges of humankind, and to figure out a way through it, we have to pull out all of our tools. From the beginning of human written history, faith and spirituality have played a big role in organizing societies, providing a structure for taking care of each other and the earth. Today, I want to offer a framework of spiritual wisdom and tools that can help us make better food and food system choices to make sure we all have enough nutritious and culturally appropriate food to eat in the coming years. Many of the spiritual tools that will be useful for our food system come from a wide variety of faith traditions. Some of the ones I will speak about today come specifically from Jewish tradition, as I am Jewish and have studied this tradition in the most depth, especially regarding the food system. I have worked at the intersection of faith and the food system for over 15 years now, and I hope to share some of the insights I've learned. I currently run Milk and Honey Farm at the Boulder JCC, a Jewish community educational farm in Boulder, Colorado, where we turn to Jewish heritage to inform our growing and programmatic priorities. Our farm is one of a couple dozen Jewish community farms in North America, which integrate Jewish experiential education with agriculture in order to cultivate community, promote environmental sustainability and food justice, foster opportunities for meaningful spiritual engagement and personal growth, and strengthen Jewish life. The ways our work intersects the topic of food justice and faith can provide useful insight into building a better food system. Back to the winter squash. I am in wonder when I see winter squash growing in the field. We plant a single seed at the end of May and watch as over the course of the growing season, the vines grow dozens of feet, in some places 2 to 3 feet tall, producing a huge variety of fruits. Each fruit grows from a single yellow squash blossom with the help of many bees and pollinators that come to visit the large flowers each day. Watching the squash grow and mature over the growing season is a natural phenomenon that reminds me of how awesome the world is. I understand scientifically what happens when a seed germinates. I understand how leaves take carbon dioxide and together with light and water make their own food to grow. But nevertheless, to witness this event up close amazes me. Abraham Joshua Heschel in God in Search of Man writes, "Wonder, or radical amazement, is the chief characteristic of the religious man's attitude toward history and nature. One attitude is alien to his spirit, taking things for granted, regarding events as the natural course of things. To find an approximate cause of a phenomenon is no answer to his ultimate wonder. He knows that there are laws that regulate the course of natural processes. He is aware of the regularity and pattern of things. However, such knowledge fails to mitigate his sense of perpetual surprise at the fact that there are facts at all. As civilization advances, the sense of wonder declines. Such decline is an alarming symptom of our state of mind. Mankind will not perish for want of information, but only for want of appreciation." I'm going to read that last line again. Mankind will not perish for want of information, but only for want of appreciation. First of all, let's forgive Heschel for his use of masculine pronouns, as was the norm when he wrote these words in 1955. Instead, let's focus on how restoring a sense of wonder to the natural world can help us create a more just and resilient food system. Practicing wonder, or radical amazement, is a personal perspective change. When we do it, we see more than a scientific explanation of how plants use photosynthesis to grow. We realize that even though we can explain how plants grow, it is nevertheless a miracle to witness and be reliant on. Plants are producers. They produce their own food just by drinking some water and laying in the sun. It's incredible. And all other consumers, herbivores, omnivores, and carnivores, are reliant upon this miracle. What if every time we ate food, we remembered this miracle? Could we justify industrial agriculture when often the growing of food is reduced to a scientific calculation of chemical fertilizers? In the industrial agriculture mindset, the earth is no longer a site of vast, miraculous soil web interactions, but just a holding ground for photosynthesis machines. Further up the food chain, the animals are similarly turned into protein-making machines, the input being plants and the output being either dairy or meat. If we turn on our wonder eyes, it seems impossible to treat the living world this way. Each living thing is a miracle to be appreciated, and not just the food that we eat or the nature around us, but the people with whom we inhabit the earth. We develop a sense of humility. Each one of us is a miraculous being, but we are only one of many miraculous beings. Turning on our wonder eyes leads to a deep reverence and respect for the earth and each other. Only with this sense of humility, reverence, and respect will we prioritize food justice for our society. In what ways could you practice wonder and radical amazement? How would it change your food choices? How could that change the food system? Recognizing the miracle of all things leads to a mindset of treating soil, plants, and farm animals in a much different way than industrial agriculture does. When we recognize the miracle of each living thing, we create healthy living systems. As a farmer, I look at agroecological principles to grow food. This is the practice of trying to mimic nature and ecological principles to guide my decision-making for producing food. The systems that emerge from this practice for growing food are more resilient. Instead of treating the soil just as a placeholder for roots, we build and nurture the soil through activities such as adding organic matter, changing tilling practices, and crop rotation. We grow a diversity of plants in what's sometimes called a polyculture. My beloved winter squash can be grown in conjunction with corn and beans in an indigenous planting method called the Three Sisters. All three plants support each other and the soil, increasing yield while also caring for the soil. When using agroecological principles, the soil is a living system that does a better job holding moisture, delivering nutrients, and is less susceptible to wind and water erosion than its industrial counterpart. It even draws carbon down from the atmosphere. When we focus on building soil, we are simultaneously participating in lowering atmospheric carbon, while at the same time creating a system that is more resilient in the face of extreme weather events. In a changing climate, nurturing soil is one of the keys to building a resilient food system. Nurturing our personal sense of wonder leads to an agricultural system that is better for the earth and each other and will hold up better in a changing climate. But it's not so easy to perpetually be in a mindset of wonder. Our dominant culture does not support it. We have to practice wonder. Children and babies seem to naturally see the world from a perspective of wonder. For me, sharing this wonder with them is one of the best parts about spending time with them. Another time it's easier for me to feel wonder is when I get to witness the miracle of life, especially in my garden. Seeing winter squash go from seed to fruit rather than simply eating the fruit gives me a visceral reminder of this everyday miracle. It's one of the reasons why we run a community farm at the JCC, to connect more people to their food and as an extension to this sense of wonder. Heschel also connects a sense of wonder to gratitude and the need to practice it every day. He writes, "No routine of the social, physical, or physiological order must dull our sense of surprise at the fact that there is a social, a physical, or a physiological order. We are trained in maintaining our sense of wonder by uttering a prayer before the enjoyment of food. Each time we are about to drink a glass of water, we remind ourselves of the eternal mystery of creation. Blessings are a practice of gratitude and help us stay connected to a sense of wonder. Reciting a blessing before eating is a powerful practice that reminds us multiple times a day to be grateful for the gifts of the world and not take them for granted. And I admit, reciting blessings before each thing I eat is a challenge. With as much excitement as I have around eating, especially when it's something delicious like roasted squash, there seems always to be something preventing me from slowing down and really being grateful for the food that I eat. Let's take a minute to learn from each other. Write in the chat what helps you remember gratitude and or say a blessing before you eat. So what helps us, people, learn from each or remember our blessings? Anyone want to share? Participating in the growing of the food. Eating with family. Eating local from the CSA, just existing. The smell. For me, taking deep breaths. Pausing. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, where our food comes from. Thank you for sharing. Ooh, a bracelet. I like that too. All right. Last fall, I read a book that challenged me even more to think, last fall I read a book that challenged me to think even more about how I respect the living things I grow and consume. It was Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. In the book, Kimmerer writes essays on the connection between indigenous wisdom, scientific thought, and an ethic of caring for the earth and each other. She is an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. She explains how using indigenous wisdom for making decisions about how we consume and interact with the earth leads to a strong system of giving rather than taking. In the indigenous mindset she grew up with, all things in the natural world are considered persons, plants, animals, and even water in its different forms. She elaborates on how our mindset changes for making decisions around consumption when we recognize the personhood in all beings. She writes, recognition of personhood does not mean that we don't consume, but that we are accountable for the lives that we take. When we speak of the living world as kin, we are also called to act in new ways, so that when we take those lives, we must do it in such a way that brings honor to the life that is taken and honor to the ones receiving it. She shares an ethic known as the honorable harvest. Know the ways of the ones who take care of you, so that you may take care of them. Introduce yourself. Be accountable as the one who comes asking for life. Ask permission before taking. Abide by the answer. Never take the first, never take the last. Take only what you need. Take only that which is given. Never take more than half, leave some for others. Harvest in a way that minimizes harm. Use it respectfully, never waste what you have taken. Share. Give thanks for what you have been given. Give a gift in reciprocity for what you have taken. Sustain the ones who sustain you, and the earth will last forever. What if my beloved winter squash I not only regard with wonder, but I also perceive as a non-human person? How could I truly honor this plant while also consuming it? I would nurture its soil, I would ask before I harvest it, I would share it with other people and be grateful, and I would use every bit of it, maybe even saving some of its seeds to plant next season before I cleaned and roasted the rest of them. Think of the food system we could build if we followed the honorable harvest. Consumption and waste would be minimized, food would be shared, soil health would be prioritized, community would be built. In a way, or you can go back, not yet for that slide. In a way, I feel like I can stop here. If we just incorporate wonder, gratitude, blessings, and the honorable harvest into our food system, we'll build a more just and resilient food system. We could personally make changes in our lives and our outlook. We could personally make changes in our lives and our outlook to influence how we eat, the food choices we make, and hopefully the broader food system policies that exist. But there are some really cool biblical laws and traditions that rabbis have been debating and commenting on for thousands of years. In their essence, they are practices that come from an ethic around food that we have just been talking about. Studying these laws and how they were practiced can give us more concrete examples of how to build a better food system. There is a very relevant commandment in Jewish tradition called in Hebrew Bal Tashchit, which means do not destroy. The commandment of Bal Tashchit derives from a line in the Torah which states, you cannot destroy a fruit tree in times of war. From that line, the prohibition of needless destruction has arisen. Some rabbis and thinkers have taken this to mean that all resources should be used to their highest purpose. In addition, if you have the opportunity to consume something simpler, but choose something more extravagant, it is considered waste. For instance, if you eat barley, traditionally an animal food, but could choose wheat, one violates Bal Tashchit. If you could drink beer but choose wine, a finer food, you have violated Bal Tashchit. It seems to me that this could easily be an argument in favor of a more plant-based diet. If you can be perfectly well sustained on a simpler food, then it is needless destruction to use these same resources that diminish as they go up the food chain. Per calorie of nutrition, animal products use more land and water and emit more greenhouse gases. Now, there are reasons to incorporate animals into our diets and into agricultural systems. Especially in agriculture, incorporating animals into rotation with plants is good for the soil and pest management. In addition, some areas of agricultural land are best suited for grazing rather than tilling. However, making sure that we are intentional about animal products in our diet is important in order to make sure that we are using the Earth's resources wisely. I'm just going to take a minute to tell you that it's very loud in here where I am, and I thought I was picking a great place, and there's a lot of wind and someone taking care of the goats on the first floor. So that's what that noise is. If it's also distracting you, I apologize. The goats that we hopefully are taking care of very responsibly here at Milk and Honey Farm. There are no hard and fast rules around how to incorporate Bal Tashchit into your food practices. But I think one of the most powerful parts of this commandment is thinking about it, debating it, having a consciousness around not wasting. If every time you choose a snack to eat, you thought about not wasting the Earth's resources, how would it change your behavior? Would you eat the same food? Would you buy the same packaging? How would you take responsibility for the food that goes bad in your refrigerator? Food waste is actually a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions today. In this country, 40% of food that is produced is wasted. What we throw out from our own refrigerators and cupboards actually makes up 40% of all that food waste. The average American wastes 20 to 30% of the food that they buy every year. Most food waste is thrown away and not composted, which means it goes into landfills, breaking down into methane, a very potent greenhouse gas. And then there's all that plastic that our food comes in today. If a company had a mindset of not wasting, how would they choose to package their food? What level of responsibility would they take for the plastic that their food comes in? In many Western countries, companies are responsible for disposing of the packaging they choose to sell their goods in. They are the ones that pay for state and municipal waste disposal, not the taxpayers. It is in the company's best interest to make sure that their packaging is more sustainable. This concept is called extended producer responsibility. These are laws that voters and municipalities pass that require companies to plan for what resources will be destroyed or preserved in their product. There are also many biblical laws in addition to Bal Tashchit that concern planting, harvesting, and food distribution. I first want to mention Peah, which Rabbi Green also mentioned in the beginning when he welcomed us today. Peah means corners. Many people familiar with Judeo-Christian ethic have heard of leaving the corners and the gleanings of your field for others. Do we have any evidence of how this was actually practiced? What did it look like for farmers to leave the corners and gleanings of their fields? The Mishnah, one of the first sources of Jewish laws written down, gives us some clues. It says that while there was no actual measurement required for how much peah to give, the amount would be based on the size of the field, the number of the poor, and the extent of the crop. It seems like it was up to the landholders to make their own decisions about how to give to the poor and foreigners in their communities. They should take into account how much land they have, what their yield was like, and how many foreigners or poor were in their community that year. This was a lot of decision-making responsibility for the farmer. I think that for this to have worked, They would have needed to be very connected to the people in their community and would have needed to be very thoughtful. How might this commandment and biblical practice help inform our own food system today? First, I want to point out that in this time period, landholders and farmers were the ones who were resourced. Those without land in general did not have as many resources. In Peah, it is required for the resourced individual to decide how much to give. It's not a tax that the government collects, but something that is built into the moral framework of the society. Today, there are other resource players besides the landowning farmers in our society. Sometimes it's individuals, and often it's large corporations and companies. Let's remember those three factors that are used when determining how much to give: the size of the field, the number of the poor, and the extent of the harvest. The size of the field is like one's savings. How much is in the bank account? The extent of the harvest is like income earned each year. And the number of poor in this case is similar to the extent of food insecurity in the community. The lack of guidance on the exact amount to give seems like it would create more thoughtfulness around giving than if there were a set amount each year, which could make the act become routine and not thought about. Each resource person or group would need to be kept informed about and connected to their community's needs so they can make decisions and weigh the community's needs against their own savings and income that year. What if we did this every year? What if every year we assessed our own assets and income, learned about or reconnected to our community's food insecure populations, and thought about how much Peah we would give? There's no set amount, so every year it would be different. You may already have a giving practice similar to this. I think for me, the framework of looking at these three factors every single year does stretch my own giving practice. Though current events certainly inform my giving priorities, I don't necessarily check the current food insecurity rates or economic situations in Boulder before I choose the amount of money I can give. I think I'll stretch myself this year and do that, and I have a feeling it'll make me want to give more. And since corporations today in America enjoy many of the same rights as citizens, they should also be held accountable to this moral framework of giving. What if corporations took account of current assets, annual income, and the community needs each year, and then made a plan for giving back? The vast majority of corporations in this country do not operate like this. In fact, for a traditional corporation in this country, it is literally against the law to make decisions about the company based on anything besides a monetary bottom line. Luckily, there is finally a legal framework called a B Corp that allows corporations to value more than just making a profit. When you are making decisions about what to buy and consume, you can prioritize choosing to buy from companies that are B corporations. This means that they have an underlying set of values that guide their company to make more than just a profit. B Corps in our food system often have environmental and social values and likely give back to the communities they serve. So in today's society, where resource individuals include many more players than just landholding farmers, we need to reimagine what Peah would look like. But the underlying inspiration and practice of sharing one's harvest with the community is nevertheless a valuable construct. And there's a second biblical agricultural law and structure that I want to mention. And this one, I think, is quite mind-blowing. It's called the Shmita Year. It's also known as the 7th year, the sabbatical year, or the year of release. In the Torah, there are two main releases: a release for the land and a release of debts. These are outlined in 3 sections of the Torah. The first mention is in Exodus, the second in Leviticus, and the third in Deuteronomy. In this first mention of Shemitah in Exodus, we see that every 6 years, a farmer refrains from farming the land, and any edible produce that grows is shared with the food insecure people of the day and the animals. There would be no more fences. In the second mention of Shemitah, we see that the land itself needs to rest every 7 years. This makes sense on a practical level because the soil must rest and be fed in order to produce better food in the years to come. In the third mention, we see a pretty radical economic construct for the Shmita year that is not connected directly to the land. Every 7 years, no one would owe any more money to anyone else. When I first learned about the 7th year, I thought farmers would count 7 years from when they started farming and take a break on their own timeline every 7 years. So the farm down the road could be on a different 7-year cycle than yours. Some of the land would always be resting, and there would always be food being produced. Some farms at any given time would take down their fences, and food would be available for all people and animals to eat from. I didn't realize that Shmita, the year of release, happened for all of the land at the very same time. This year actually, in the Jewish calendar, is the Shmita year. I think the bizarreness of thinking about an entire region not farming and my growing up in our capitalist economic system completely blinded me to the fact that it would be possible for the earth to have its own cycle of time where humans and our economic needs didn't matter. The earth in this case has a relationship with the divine that does not include us. Had I already read Braiding Sweetgrass before learning about Shmita, maybe it wouldn't have seemed so bizarre that the land and earth could have its own rest cycle in time. So what would the Shmita year have actually looked like? There is evidence that this was actually practiced up until the Second Temple period. Landholders wouldn't own any of the edible food that would grow in their land. Everyone, including animals, had an equal right to it. But if every 7 years it was forbidden to till and plant the earth in the land of Israel, what would people eat in the Shmita year? A lot of food would have come from perennial plants like fruit trees, probably more than it does today, as our calories often mostly come from cereal grains. Perennial plants like fruits, nuts, and herbs often provide more nutritious calories than grains, which are farmed annually. One can also eat the food of what seeds germinate on their own. Gardeners today call plants like these that grow on their own volunteers. And now I get to return to my winter squash, because this is one of the most consistent volunteers in my garden. I almost always have volunteer winter squashes come back where I grew them the year before, or they come back in my compost pile. Any unharvested fruits from the previous year would leave their seeds in the soil and could come back and provide sustenance for the next year. There are also quite a few weeds that would likely grow in these places that are indeed edible. In addition to what the field would look like, all debts that one may have accumulated were released during this year. The Shmita year levels the economic playing field. People aren't making money from production, and people aren't paying for food, and they no longer owe anyone any money. Can you imagine what would happen if we took a break in this country every 7 years from our livelihoods, no longer owed any money, and didn't have to pay for food? It would be such a radical economic shift from prioritizing the false construct of eternal economic growth. This false construct that leaves so many people behind causes huge economic disparities and is destroying our earth for ourselves and the next generation. Instead, our economic system would be based around how we feed each other and how we could plan for the release every 7 years. Let's all take a deep breath together. Building a resilient and just food system in the age of climate crisis is no small task. We need to have new ways of thinking, or perhaps old ways of thinking, to develop solutions and changes in all parts of the food and economic system. What's good for us is that so many wisdom and faith traditions offer insight to how we have dealt with similar challenges over the ages. Using tools such as gratitude, mindfulness, and blessings can help us change our consumption patterns and connect to the earth. Expanding our understanding of who or what is a person allows us to reframe how we use resources. Shifting to a mindset of purposeful consumption is better for the earth and each other. Learning lessons from ancient and community-minded economic systems can give us a model for effective wealth distribution. And the understanding that the earth has its own rhythm of time, irrespective of human needs, forces us to rethink how we grow and distribute food. We will all play a role in ensuring our collective future and food supply. Luckily, we won't be doing it alone. We will be working together with each other, our ancestors, and our ancient wisdom. Thank you, everyone.
That was amazing. We're so grateful. Thank you so much for that. Let me stop sharing for a moment so we can see everybody and look at some of these comments. I think there's been a lot of support, and certainly in the chat, and we're very, very, very grateful. Yes, that new store in Boulder that doesn't have packaging. I think, what's it called? Is it Nude Market? Yes, they're saying yes.
Yep.
I think this gave us a lot to think about. What I'd like to do is to go to our next part of the conversation. And after we hear from our three friends, we'll be able to open the floor and have some conversation with everybody all together. But I think that this was a really wonderful presentation, Becca, and we're really very grateful. So thank you. Hayden Dansky is our next speaker. Hayden is the co-founder and executive director of Boulder Food Rescue, who works to create a more just and less wasteful food system via bicycle-based distribution of surplus produce and community-led systems. Their primary focuses are decreasing food access barriers, increasing health equity, and building community-led participatory programs that support the inherent leadership of individuals within the community. And Hayden, we're glad to have you here, and we're all looking forward on how your presentation is going to be building right on top of the foundation Becca started with us. So thank you.
Hi, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, and can you see my presentation?
We see your
Cool.
presentation.
Okay. Good, I got multiple screens. I can see some of you, not all of you, but hi. Thank you so much for the introduction and for inviting me to speak, Rabbi Green and David and Linda for putting this on. And thanks for that presentation, Becca. That was awesome. I feel super inspired. And I also, from a selfish perspective, feel really grateful for all the pumpkin and squash recipe ideas to do something with my harvest that's literally overflowing out of my closet right now. So thanks, everyone. I'm really relying on you. Yeah, but I feel really honored to be speaking about these intersections between food justice and spirituality. And I wasn't actually necessarily explicitly invited to speak on the spirituality piece, but I'll bring in a little bit of my own personal kind of connections. And today, mostly I'll be speaking about community-led programming, what that is. Rabbi Green just said a whole bunch of like kind of words around participatory and community-led and food access and barriers and all of these things. So what is that? How it creates more food access in a respectful and dignified way. I'll share a little bit about food insecurity and some of the systems that are causing that, as well as the systems that we're building here, trying to address some of those issues. Food justice, social and environmental justice, are all necessarily interwoven with one another and with spirituality for me. My connection to my spirituality is through building reciprocal relationships it is through working towards justice, being in more right relationship with the land and with others. And I learned by being in relationship with others, by messing up, by receiving feedback, by growing, and my work and my unlearning is very much a spiritual practice of and very worldly for me. I am a part of so I went ahead and threw in a slide about Shmita, which Becca just talked about. I'm a part of a group of Jewish activists based out of Denver that's been like learning about and leaning into the year Shmita and this year or over the last year and now into this year. And since Becca already spoke to this so beautifully, I'm not going to go into it much now, but what I love about it is that it is about rest and release. It's about redistribution of power and resources, which is so much of what our work is about. It recognizes those disparities, right? And puts us back on this on a more even playing field. So we don't have these huge disparities of wealth and resources that we see today. And it asked me like today, like one thing that I'm leaning into is like, what does this look like for me today, right? What excess can I share? How do I rest so that I can generate the overflow that I can actually give? What debts can I forgive? You know, even if I don't have monetary debts, what emotional debts am I holding on to? What excess am I holding on to that I can let go of and release? How can I, and like in community with my community, still practice these concepts if our society doesn't? And yeah, so I had to throw in that piece for myself. And also I want to share too that like a lot of my analysis of food access and food systems comes with critique of the larger systems that are at play. And I usually want to preface that by saying that, you know, we all engage in harmful systems in some way or another, and myself included. And so it's not meant to, my critique is not meant to be a judgment on that, but more of a critique out of love and curiosity, out of a desire to show up in solidarity with the communities that we serve. So we can ask ourselves, how do we deepen in our analysis and our solutions? How do we deepen in our love for community? How do we deepen in the excavation of like what isn't working within ourselves? That's the process of unlearning so that we can show up in more raw and honest ways with one another. And that's the lens and the values that I carry throughout my work and throughout this presentation, and the intersections with some of these practices and some of these concepts of Shmita as well. So with that, I'll share a little bit about what the heck I'm talking about. Boulder Food Rescue is a grassroots nonprofit based out of Boulder that works to create a more just and less wasteful food system, has been shared. We redistribute healthy but perishable food from grocery stores that would have otherwise been wasted, and we take it to low-income communities across Boulder. As Becca mentioned, we waste in this country up to 40% of everything we produce. They say if food waste were its own country, it would be the third largest contributor to greenhouse gases behind the US and China. So it's a huge environmental issue right now in our climate crisis. And for BFR, in order to like fully minimize our environmental impact, we try to do as much as possible by bicycle. We form partnerships with others in the community to kind of ensure that we're all situated in this landscape in a way that makes sense and honors kind of what we all do best. We work with Becca and the JCC farm to pick up excess, pick up produce they donate to Boulder Food Rescue. This picture with the tricycle is Janae, who is picking up squash that's at the JCC farm. And so that's one way that we are kind of working in collaboration with others. We're also, I know Dina from Community Food Share is about to speak too. You know, we're in partnership with Community Food Share. We have an arrangement at grocery stores that we each focus on the foods that we distribute best. We primarily pick up produce. They primarily pick up everything else. We have days that we exchange, and we're constantly in coordination. We have different models and different scales that we operate, different resources, different ways in which we distribute food out. And so we kind of, I guess, like the piece that I want to share that I think is so important to me is that I believe that, you know, these relationships are a good example of sharing. Hunger and food waste are both really complex problems. And I believe personally that they actually need complex solutions, and we need a diversity of models and different approaches and to tackle these things in different ways. So in an attempt to not try to oversimplify some of these complex needs, it's really awesome that we can all be here in process doing this work. Boulder Food Rescue primarily sets up what we call no-cost grocery programs. And I'm going to speak to the kind of the importance of these and why these are such a fundamental piece of our programming throughout this entire presentation. But essentially we pick up and distribute to places and people that people are already gathered: affordable housing sites, preschools, daycares, community centers. And people in that community distribute the food amongst themselves. They're an active part of those programs. We take food directly to 30 different no-cost grocery programs across Boulder, about 12 times a day, every day of the week. And then the residents at those sites then again run those programs. And then we work together to understand what are their needs, to take feedback and to mitigate those barriers to accessing food. So in Boulder, prior to the pandemic, at least 1 in 8 people in our community were food insecure. since COVID hit, the latest number I've seen, Dina might have better updated numbers on this, but the latest number across Colorado, at least that I've seen, is 1 in 4. Some of the stats around this have, fluctuated as the kind of pandemic has shaken out. And in, a world today where most people don't grow their own food, with some exceptions, right? Most people, in this world today, most people don't grow their own food, right? Most people sell their labor, right? And then they make money to then exchange for food. So people aren't hungry necessarily because they don't have enough food. People are oftentimes what's really at play for them. I mean, there's definitely not enough food, not land to grow it on. But what's at play for them is that they don't necessarily have enough money to then go to the grocery store and purchase food. That's how most of us get our food today. And so hunger is also a result of economic insecurity, which is why this has ballooned so much since the pandemic hit. The minimum wage in Colorado is about $12 an hour. A living wage is what somebody needs to access housing, food, medical costs, and basically maintain a basic standard of living without needing subsidies. In Boulder, the living wage is $6 an hour more than the minimum wage. It's $26 an hour more if you're a single parent with a child. And that living wage doesn't even include things like savings, vacation, breathing room, right? That's just your basic standard of living. So where the cost of living is higher, you're also likely to not qualify as much for government subsidies that might be based on a federal or even a county poverty level. So things like WIC or SNAP, which is our food stamps, our government subsidies. So sometimes, reverse to how we might think of a place that like Boulder, where it's generally a wealthier community, it can also be really hard because the cost of living is higher. People think there's less poverty here, but in reality, it could be harder to get by. There's a huge gap between where you don't qualify for subsidies, but where you're actually making a livable wage. Not to mention, most of your wages are probably going to rent, right? And rent is a fixed expense. You have to pay all of your rent to keep your housing. And so once people pay all of their rent to keep their housing, they're more likely to spend less on things that are more flexible expenses, things like food. And so this is actually one major reason that we see such high rates of hunger and lack of food access in places like Boulder. So it basically leaves us with two food systems. There's one of choice and there's one of charity. Most of us in this room likely experience choice access. We can buy food from a grocery store, a CSA, farmer's market, maybe we even grow some. We can buy the foods we need to be healthy, foods we recognize and want to cook with, foods that look and taste good to us. Sorry, wrong way. Here's my grocery store. We know how we're gonna get all of our food once we eat all of our food. We don't have to sacrifice other necessities in order to get it. We might not be able to get whatever we want whenever we want it, but we can probably get pretty close. And then there's a food system called charity. And this is one where you have to make sacrifices in order to eat. Charitable food often looks like a reduction of choice and control. Imagine you can't choose what you want. You go to the food bank when you can, but you work during their open hours. There's a little fresh produce to choose from, and you just had to fill out the same paperwork at several different places. While you're there, people tell you what foods you can pick. You have your own budget and your own food stamps, but only about $80 a month. You run out of that about 10 days in. You get creative, you make it work. These are some of the barriers to accessing food through a charitable system. All of these barriers in and of themselves, many people may have heard of. But what's really interesting to me, at least, is what are the ways in which these barriers intersect and amplify and compound upon one another. For example, many food assistance agencies might only be open during traditional working hours. If you're economically insecure, you're more than likely going to have a job that has an hourly wage and it doesn't have flexible scheduling. So in order to get to maybe a pantry or a food assistance agency in time, you're likely having to take off of work, which could risk your employment by having to ask off often. And you also lose out on wages that you might have otherwise had. So it's not just about the inconvenience, it's actually an expense to you. Or another example of this might be paperwork. Filling out paperwork can be a burden. It can also take a lot of time. not just to fill it out, but to understand what you need to bring if you even qualify, since every agency might have different requirements for being able to get there. So beyond just the time inconvenience, people also feel like, and they've told us over and over again, that they have to like prove their poverty in order to go to a place to get food. So the paperwork requirements, ended up actually replicating the societal stigma that using these systems actually makes you needy and in some way, some kind of failure. And that failure gets internalized as shame. These barriers also intersect with additional pieces of the larger food access system. For example, health is not just physical. It's not just about access to fruits and vegetables, although people tell us all the time, they just want more fruits and vegetables. It's also emotional, mental, and spiritual. Although so that's like one example. It plays into emotional labor. It plays into that shame and stigma that's internalized, but also having access to health and the things that you need can help heal you from that shame and stigma of accessing those resources. I have a whole other talk and presentation on trauma and shame and how that gets internalized. We won't go into it today, but it's really interesting how those things play out. Another example is although it's not an excuse for being accountable to changing these systems, is also not all bad, right? Navigating these systems with others can create community. It forces ingenuity. It creates resilience within communities. So it's all just to say someone's experience getting food isn't as simple as sometimes we think. Not having enough food in and of itself is traumatic. And navigating a world where you don't have food is really hard. So it's important to recognize, as a representative of a food access agency myself, that we have control of a resource that somebody needs to survive. There's a lot of power in that. So we can't just expect to get genuine feedback from someone if we don't end up building trust and genuine relationships with our community. It's also really important to recognize that although charitable food is absolutely life-saving, and it is, people tell us this all the time, these systems literally save people's life, it's also not free. It costs time, emotional tolls, physical health, and invisible labor. And so for these reasons, you might be thinking hey, this is kind of these are some broken systems, right? But it's actually not a broken system. It's functioning like it's supposed to. It's an exploitative system based on race, class, and geography. It's a system of power and resource consolidation. So it ends up working really great for some people and really not working for a lot of people. It's not to say that these charitable systems are bad or wrong either. Most people just want to have a say in how these programs are run and give input to make them better. And unfortunately, many of our nonprofit systems don't allow for meaningful contributions from their users. Even with the prevalence of the emergency food system, food insecurity rates have roughly remained the same prior to the pandemic, and then obviously skyrocketed in the pandemic. They pretty much follow the same kind of rates of economic insecurity throughout our country. When we had the housing collapse in 2008, food insecurity rates rose. And so what we really need is a new system. We need change at the root of things. So we can imagine a better system. I lost my place. Here we go. So let's imagine a better system. Maybe part of the system is that everyone makes a wage, right, to allow them to use that choice system. Maybe part of that system is land returned to people who have had their land and labor forcefully taken from them. I don't know. Maybe that's up for us to decide. But whatever the specific features of that completely different, more just system are, access to food, security, and health can't be predicted according to race and class. People would have equitable access to food. And that more just food system isn't going to happen until we start transferring power and resource control to the people who currently use the charitable system. And so we operate within this charitable system, but we're trying to use food as a tool to change it, to do things a little differently with relationships and dignity at our core. We deliver food to people in places they're already going to be. Like I said, backyards and community centers of low-income housing sites, picking up their kids from school. We expected it would reduce some of those barriers that we were learning about, such as open hours and transportation. It also just worked better for people. It worked better for people because the programs were run by the people who use them. They do the work and they make decisions about how food gets distributed, what they receive, when they receive it. This is an example of what we call a participatory program. This is one in which the program users get to participate in the creation, and the design and the decision-making processes around how that program gets run. They're active players in the system. They also create trust within their own communities. The heart of all organizing is realizing that we have a shared common problem. And when we come together around food, we can actually do so much more. So food is not just a resource, but it becomes a language. We saw this at play when COVID hit. People stopped leaving their homes. Some folks, especially at a lot of the senior sites that we distribute food to, weren't even leaving their apartments. So we were already taking produce directly to these housing sites because that's what our model was designed around. But the community leaders that had been building these relationships for over the last 8 years, they were the cornerstone of the success of food distribution throughout Boulder. Housing sites had limited outside access in. So we collaborated with a lot of other food access agencies to be able to bring more food besides just produce to these sites. Because the thing is, you can't just show up to a housing site and dump a bunch of food, right? The squirrels would become your participants, which they would probably be really happy for. But we were really trying to get it to the folks who needed it. And so the grocery program coordinators who had been running these programs in their sites for how long, however long, about 8-9 years, they were really essential to be able to take that food and then get it out to their neighbors. And that's what they did. They knew who was isolated. They knew who needed what food, who has what allergies, who loves cherries. They also created systems that work for them. Some of them pre-bagged the food and then they set up no contact drop-offs and pickups. Some of them had socially isolated lines outside. Some of them created food ordering systems with door-to-door delivery. Each one was different because each one was created by that community and did something that that community needed. We see this in even where it gets set up. Sometimes it's in a community room, sometimes it's in a laundry room. People use the resources they have to get creative and really make sure things work. And that's because communities have been without easy and abundant access to food and resources and wealth have actually been supporting their own health and well-being for literally forever, right? And what nonprofits could do is acknowledge that and honor that and leverage that resilience by transferring resources and control to those control of those resources to these partner communities. So it ends up not just being about respect, but also about resiliency. These are the foundations of mutual aid. People who have lived experience of these issues join this movement, which actually breaks isolation and stigma. This both exposes the failures of the current system while simultaneously creating completely new ways of doing things, building relationships with dignity and trust. We live in a world that isolates us from one another. When we have resources, we don't always need our neighbors. Like if I can afford to, I can purchase what I need from Amazon and have it delivered to my door within days without needing to talk to anyone. But the growing crises and the need for healing and being in connection actually creates conditions where we need to rely on one another again. This is about reciprocity, folks having a say in how they do that, having a meaningful voice and a hand in how we care for one another. Actually gives people agency, which creates that healing from that trauma of not having enough. We need community as much as the community needs us and the resources that they need to access that we have. We begin to obscure the lines between service provider and program user, between those who have and those who don't. This is an asset-based approach. It's as opposed to one that's kind of based in deficits. A deficit-based approach is one where an organization sees a deficit in a community, like these people need food, and then they go in and try to fix those problems without actually asking the people they're trying to fix what they need. We kind of see this, and people refer to this as like white saviorism, going in and trying to fix other people who don't have, and it often plays a part or class race lines. But when an organization actually values the assets of a community, things like creativity, relationships, ingenuity, vibrancy, then we can create a system where the people using the programs actually matter. And what they say and what they think and what they do matters, and how they feel matters. They're not just numbers for how many people we're serving, they're whole humans with whole human needs. And we send them, and this is a way this comes out for us. Like we send them birthday cards and dog treats and invite them to spend time with us, right? We become friends. Sometimes people say that this is like a very radical and visionary approach. And that is not really rooted in reality. And that can be a privilege. And I kind of agree. It can be. It can be a privilege to think really radically about our world, right? And also, only settling for what's practical can also be a privilege. Settling for a solution that's good enough, that doesn't address the real needs of people, will always keep some folks disadvantaged, right? Again, relating that back to this Shmita concept of resetting, releasing, redistributing, right? Settling for what's practical can kind of keep that power distribution disadvantaged. And so, things like saying people should be grateful for the free food that they get, it doesn't actually meet people where they're at and actually allow them to meet their needs. Pretending like we're going to solve hunger by just giving out more and more food without actually addressing the racial and class divides, that can also be a privilege. And so what it is for me is that space in between what's practical and what's radical. Between meeting the growing and pervasive need to survive and doing that in a meaningful way, that is where the action happens. And that's where we're trying to place ourselves today. Times I hear nonprofits say like, this work can be too hard. There's not enough time to do this work. But as Adrienne Marie Brown, who's a big inspirer of us, says, this is what a liberated relationship is about. Liberated relationships understand that there's enough attention, care, resource, and connection for all of us to belong and be in our dignity. Brene Brown says that the opposite of scarcity isn't abundance. The opposite of scarcity is enough. We have to realize that there's enough food to go around. We actually produce enough food to feed everyone, and we unfortunately waste half of it. Nonprofits, service providers, food access agencies, human service agencies, we're all subject to all these same systems. We're humans too. We fight over our resources. We feel the impacts of scarcity. And so it's important to recognize that we're actually all needed and that we all have a place here. And it's also not only isolated to the food system. It happens all the time within businesses, governments, no matter what problems we're trying to solve and people we're trying to help. So the challenge for me is asking ourselves, well, who has a seat at the table? What's being served? Who gets to decide what we're eating? To do that work of radically interrogating our egos and asking more questions. What would it mean to pull up more chairs? To make sure there's space for a wheelchair, to have interpretation available, to have culturally relevant foods, to invite more people to have a voice in what's being served and when and where, to talk about our identities and our experiences in our community so we can better understand how to move forward together. What would it mean to actually all sit down and eat together, to build relationships where food is our language, and do work that is more in line with our own personal values? My hope is that we can all see that our liberation is bound with one another, that we realize that we all have a stake in making change, that we reduce our food waste, nourish ourselves, and give from our overflow, that we witness each other in our mistakes, our growth, our wonder, our curiosity, that we continue to practice being in reciprocal relationships with the land and with people, and that we work together to ensure that nobody here in our community can be hungry. Thank you.
That was amazing. That was really great. Hayden, thank you so much. I think for a lot of us today, we are all learning so much. Some of you have certainly been in this world and in this niche, and maybe this is like old school for you. And I can certainly also say that there are a lot of folks that are learning and are thinking and are reflecting. And I think that this was really powerful. Friends, we have one more person who's going to share. And just for a little bit of a shorter time. So we hope that you'll stay on and hang on before we engage one another in some questions and comments. But I'd like to invite our last guest, Dina Coates. Dina is the Chief Development Officer for Community Food Share since 2016. Her career spans 25 years in the nonprofit realm with an emphasis on food insecurity, domestic violence, and child abuse prevention. Community Food Share, a Feeding America food bank, has experienced an over 30% increase in demand since the beginning of the pandemic and anticipates the impact on local families will continue for many years to come. Ms. Coates and her team work diligently to educate the community on the complexities of food insecurity pre and post pandemic in an effort to sustain the mission to eliminate local hunger. So, Dina, if you will unmute yourself, and I'm going to get your slides ready.
Thank you, Rabbi. And thank you to the Backracks. And I guess the pros and cons, the pros of going last is the two fabulous speakers before me have really covered just about everything. So I'm just going to be a little more free about what I'm saying and support the previous speakers. But what really stuck with me was David's comments about people being reminded about the beginning of food injustice and insecurity in our country, because it's simultaneous with the formation of the United States as we know now. So land and food have been weaponized throughout the history of the US. The food system as we know it today has been built in part by controlling people of color through force and coercion. Thankfully, we are moving that pendulum and are, as Hayden just mentioned, bringing more people to the table, not just participants, but at all levels of food insecurity and food justice, to have those conversations and see how to improve the quality of life of all of the citizens of this country. There are some national movements that are working to claim the rightful place of Indigenous people at these conversations, and some of those are like Indigenous Food Justice and the Black-led food justice organizations, Food Workers Justice. And on a local level, we received a grant several years ago from the Colorado Health Foundation to create something called the Food Security Network. And that is bringing people to the table from all of the communities that we serve in Boulder and Brimfield counties to have that voice and have those conversations. And many of them are not what we would typically include as being in the work of food insecurity, but they're interacting with the people who are food insecure. And so those voices are really important. Community Food Share, in our 40th year this year, it's our birthday, we have 41 partner agencies throughout the community. So the work that we do with some on-site, and we do a lot of mobile pantries and off-site programming, but we have 41 partner agencies throughout the community that cover the breadth of our citizens, from the youngest to the eldest, in ensuring that they have adequate food for a good quality of life. So Community Food Share works collaboratively with so many entities throughout the community. Usually when I talk to people and they're like, oh yeah, I support so-and-so, and I'm like, fabulous, because we do too. So we really do align. We live in a country that has food insecurity, but we have an overabundance of food. And when I speak with children and I say, what does a hungry person look like? Inevitably somebody will say, you know, somebody very thin and sad looking. And where in our country, a lot of food insecure families and individuals don't look like that. We have poor nutrition in this country. We have food, but poor nutrition. And so it's masked by obesity and creates a lot of other health issues. We typically pre-pandemic, and Rabbi, you can change the slide for me, please. So we talked a little bit about food justice before, but one of the things that was most important to me about working at Community Food Share as a mom of 6 kids is that I want the families that I work for and represent to have the same options in choosing culturally relevant foods, you know, people with sensitive dietary issues, whatever the reason may be. I want them to have the same opportunity to have access to the foods that will be best for their families. So unlike what we would think of, or when I was growing up, a food pantry was a box of shelf-stable
Hi there, folks. I'm sure she'll be coming back in just a second. It looks like her Wi-Fi has a hiccup. So far, it sounds great, though.
Putting out, and we put out about 11 million, pardon? We put out 11 million pounds of food a year. We focus on the nutritional value of those foods. Next slide, please. Where does our food come from? Pre-pandemic, 90% of the food of those 11 million pounds that we distribute, 90% of that was from local food retail rescue. We are out every single day in all major retailers working on rescuing food, shelf staple and the fresh produce. Our largest food gift, in-kind gift this year was from the tragedy at the Boulder King Superstore. And they were gracious enough to take everything in the store that could be salvaged and make a donation. So that was a huge boon to us, which was really necessary because, as I mentioned, typically 90% of the food that we distribute is rescued food. Since the beginning of the pandemic, if you go to the store, you see empty shelves, you know that there's limited supply. Imagine the impact on us who's wanting to rescue food when they don't have enough food for their own customers. So we are now having to purchase up to 40% more of the food than we typically would. We have a lot of fabulous in-kind food donors locally. We glean from local farmers, and we get a little bit of food from federal government programs. We do food drives, and then we have a Grow a Row program where we ask local gardeners to grow an extra row or two in their garden and donate it to Community Food Share. And then we also have 27 growers locally that donated almost 100,000 pounds of free produce. A lot of that we gleaned ourselves. I helped harvest about 11,000 pounds of pumpkins recently, which was fun for the first 30 or 40 minutes. And then it became very obvious that this is very hard work. But the gratitude of the families and being able to share recipes that we'll have to collect your recipes, Becca, and share it with our participants because, a lot of the foods that we grow locally are not foods that are known to our participants. And so we're always sharing recipes with them. We also have 4 farms that grow exclusively for Community Food Share. And thanks to a very generous donor that just stepped forward in the last couple of weeks, we will have a full-time farmer on staff starting next year. So we want to keep the food that we're able to give, once again, like I choose for my families, to be local, fresh, and most of it is organic. Next slide, please. So I've been thinking about the difference and the correlation between faith, hope, and food. And faith is what's happening now in the present. Hope is looking forward to me, and food plays an integral part in all of that. We see the isolation that happens in seniors' homes when they aren't able to have someone come over and have a cup of coffee and a cookie with them, or they will not have their families come and visit because they can't cook for their families and they're ashamed of that. And that is a very isolating experience, where when we have a bounty of food, it attracts people. We come together from all walks of life. We can see a stranger walking down the street eating something that looks delicious and say, "Ooh, that looks good. Excuse me, where did you get that?" It's a connector of humanity. And so the fact that the participants that we engage with on a daily basis have an overabundance of faith and hope is what serves as the catalyst to keep doing the work that we're all doing. And by all of us, I mean your support here today and learning about food insecurity and what you can do is exactly what we need our community to do, is to educate, be educated on the issues that people are facing, to dispel the myths of food insecurity, and to understand that I think Hayden explained the cost of living here. Food is also 30% more expensive in our community. So I believe the numbers are right around $90,000 a year is the average income that a family of four needs to be self-sustaining and not needing any assistance from other people. And that is a big number. I'm from the Midwest. $90,000 a year is a huge income to sustain a family of four. And that's the reality of the community that we live in right now. So we need to continue to have faith that if we come together and that the efforts that we're making on a daily basis are going to have a positive impact. We need to have hope for the future in addressing the systemic changes that need to be made. And we need to be grateful for food, like Becca mentioned earlier. Every day as we sit down, have gratitude for the food in our lives and open our minds and think more about being less wasteful or sharing more. One of my favorite things on the floor, on the Feeding Families floor, is every now and then we get someone who asks, aren't you worried about someone trying to manipulate the system? And I see the exact opposite happen on a daily basis. I see that people get those government prepackaged boxes that we then supplement with fresh produce and proteins. But people take that box, and if they have a food allergy or an aversion to a food or whatever, they will stand in there and remove that food from their box because they can't use it, and food is so precious to them. So what we experience on a daily basis is being able to work with people who have the utmost appreciation and gratitude for food. Next slide, please. And I'm trying to hurry because I know we're behind time. So this effort requires all of our attention because it is a complex issue and the solutions will not be difficult. There's a fabulous documentary I would encourage everyone today. Here it's a beautiful day, so if you're local, you may not want to watch it today, but one of those cold winter days that we hope are coming up in the near future, it's called A Place at the Table. And it's I think it's from 2013, but it really does a good job of, on a high level, of giving an introduction to why we're at the place we are right now with food insecurity in this country. And I'm really talking pre-pandemic. But the fact that we almost eradicated hunger in this country in the 70s, but then with political interventions, it ramped up the unfair systems that are impacting the families that we serve. And I think it's really worth an hour and a half of your time. It's called A Place at the Table. But you as individuals, whether you're here or wherever you are in the country, volunteer. We take kids 5 years and up with their families. It's a great family activity. Grow something in your garden and donate it. Become an ambassador and help us educate the community. Skilled volunteers. We don't have a lot of extra resources for things like IT skills and that. If you can do that, we would love to have you. Conduct a virtual food drive instead of gifts for a holiday. Conduct a virtual food drive. Consider making a legacy gift. Sit down and talk with your family. What's important to you? What kind of legacy do you want to leave in this community? And know that for every $1 that you donate to Community Food Share, we're able to put out $5 worth of groceries back into the community. And that's a really significant impact. Thanksgiving's coming up in a week, and I don't want to embarrass Linda and David, and I didn't ask them, so they can yell at me later if they'd like. But one of the most beautiful examples that I experienced, and I've shared this with many other donors, is that the Backracks kept their grocery receipts for Thanksgiving dinner, and then made a donation back to us in the amount that totaled those grocery receipts. And I thought that was a really gracious, conscientious way to have gratitude at Thanksgiving, which is what the holiday is all about, correct? Next slide, please. This donation form came in the mail Friday. And if you can see, we've whited out the donor's name. This donor put 30 cents, taped a quarter and a nickel on to the receipt and sent it back to us. And then the small language above, it says for 30 cents for as many meals as possible. This is the first step as a community to coming together and addressing food insecurity. I'm going to guess that this 30 cents was really significant to this donor. There are many ways they could have used that 30 cents, and yet they sent it and shared it to us because they realized that there are so many others out in the community that are food insecure. I recently had a meeting with a major donor, and they give quite a lot of money on an annual basis, so we're eternally grateful. But I talked about the fact that one of the initiatives that we're putting a lot of resources into right now is having culturally relevant foods for our participants. And he stopped me immediately and said, "Oh, I guess beggars can be choosers then." I was so taken aback. I had to gather my thoughts for a minute because on every level, that statement is so wrong. But I thought, you know what, this is a great opportunity to not get angry, but to use the opportunity for education and to talk about why culturally relevant foods are important, why food is important beyond nourishing our bodies, but for nourishing our souls. So what it could have and did start out as a very rough conversation, and of course I was disappointed in this donor. I was taken aback. Ended up being a really wonderful conversation and a good growth opportunity for me, and I hope for this donor, to step back, not assume that we know why people are in the situation that they're in. Most people don't know that we live in a country that disposes of almost 50% of the food that is produced. They don't know that you can go to a local farm and glean food for free before they till under, and you know, it may not be beautiful fruit, but it's delicious fruit and vegetables. So I would challenge everybody to take the information that you've received today, sit back and meditate or pray about it, and think about how we can change our own internal attitudes, and then work with our families, and then spread that out through the community. Because there's work that we can all do, and there's work that we all should be doing, and there's work that we need to be doing in our community. So this is a great first step, and I really, again, want to thank the Backracks and Rabbi Green so much for the opportunity to be able to share with you the work that we do and the passion that we have for it. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. That was also, I think, really helpful in providing a big picture and certainly sharing about the work from Community Food Share. What I hope that we can do at this moment, we provided some time for a break, which I'm going to slash. But I think it would be a good idea to stretch. So if you want to take 2 or 3 minutes, stretch, need a bio break, have some water. We'd like to come back and have our friends share together, answer some questions. And then for a little bit longer, we're going to be having you choose your own group to join, with one for each of our guest speakers, so that you can have a smaller and perhaps more in-depth kind of give and take about some of the topics that were shared today. But we're going to be all together And so take a couple of minutes. My computer says 11:36. So at about 11:40, we're going to pick up again with a little bit of a shorter panel discussion, and still going to be ending around the time that we were planning at around 12:30. So it's 11:36. Take a break, stretch, some water, and we'll start again at 11:40. Hope everybody's having fun. Well, friends, I'm going to keep thanking our friends who were a part of this conversation today. For someone who tries to stay on top of the issues and share concerns and encourage people to practice good behavior, I know I, for one, have learned a tremendous amount and have been able to see where my thoughts and spirituality, spiritual pursuits intersect with these issues of justice. I like, for example, how one of those blessings that you spoke about, Becca, one blessing, the rabbis will say, if you don't say a blessing of this gratitude, it's almost like stealing. And because the blessing, which is You know, Hamotzi lecha min haaretz, who brings forth bread from the earth. And of course, bread doesn't come from the earth, but are we stealing from God and the resources that are given to us? Are we stealing from the people who are the farmers and the folks at the mill and the folks at wherever we might get that bread? Because I'm not much of a baker myself. So who am I taking from? And if I do say it, who am I expressing my gratitude to and for? So this has been, I think all of this is really so compelling, and we are so grateful. I'd love to ask a little bit for you to respond to each other from your own words. One of the things that we heard about is a moral framework of society and a moral framework of giving was what was shared today. And how can your approaches, your work, your energies be a response to kind of redesigning a moral framework within our society? What can you bring to that conversation? Who would like to unmute and share? Oh, come on.
I'll just share before we start getting going with all these questions that I take a little bit of time normally to think before I speak right away.
That is a very good practice. I should learn that myself.
I think it's really important to be okay in a safe space to not know everything and to say I didn't know, I had no idea. There's no shame in that as long as you're moving forward and once you've been made aware of something that you want to learn more about it. So I like to embrace the fact that I know so little about this world and that there's infinite opportunity for me to continue to learn and grow and not feel bad about that, but to feel empowered that now there's something new for me to learn about.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think there's a lot of folks that sometimes feel like we call out, and I really appreciate being called in and having a new insight in order to respond. Lovely.
Yeah, I love that too. Dang. You know, when people ask me about a moral framework, I usually just freeze. I'm like, a framework? Something that, you know, I don't know. I think sometimes I struggle with the idea of a framework in terms of morality. The idea that like maybe it will always be something, because for me it feels like ever changing as I grow, maybe. And like I guess, you know, there's this I guess where my brain was like, what I've heard a bunch of times is the only constant is change, and that we're always changing and growing and learning. But one thing that feels really, really true for me throughout my life has been like, and what I spoke about was building relationships with people. And maybe that speaks to this, like, it's hard. There's not like for me necessarily like, here are the rules to follow, even though I think as humans it's really helpful to have like, here are the rules to follow, like here's the thing to be good, you know. And I don't know if that actually exists, like there's a bunch of rules to be good, but I do think that the more that I just build relationships with people, the more I can just ask, like, what do you need? And what do I need? And how does this relationship work? And what does our relationship need to be healthy, to grow and to learn? And so, you know, we can understand these boxes and systems and see, you know, everything I spoke about, like, wow, there's huge disparities among people based on their identity, based on the ways in which these systems have treated people, based on the ways that people who I think have power and maybe I would say are even addicted to money and power, right, perpetuate that and keep that alive. And we can work towards, you know, undoing that on a human level. You know, the way that I think we get there is we build relationships and we learn from one another, and we learn and we embrace like our diversity of experiences, you know, instead of trying to say like, oh, maybe we should all be the same. It's like, what would it look like to imagine a world where we're all really different and we value our differences and we embrace our differences and we love and learn from one another's differences, but we all belong. And so like, I guess that's the world that I imagine. And then the way in which I try to like do, I even hesitate to say do good in this world, or like to be in my own morality, maybe in this world, is to like try to work towards that. What does that look like in my life today? What does that look like in my community today? What does that look like how I show up today? And knowing, like Dina said, I'm going to make mistakes all the time, but I'm just going to keep trying to work towards that. Maybe that's my moral framework, I guess.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that.
Hayden, and I think one of the things that you said at the beginning of your presentation about just like the many players in the space that are necessary, which I feel like you just alluded to as well, that like it takes all of us from a lot of different niches and perspectives, all having a say at the table and doing our work. And I think, you know, one of the things that at Milk and Honey Farm and at the JCC, like when I'm trying to figure out like why do we have a community farm? Like, what's the point? You know, okay, we're connecting people to our food. That's important, but like what really is that about? And I think a lot of times I just come to like, we're building better humans. Like we're trying to we use food in order to try and build, you know, in order to have people in this world who are, you know, more respectful, who understand consumption, who connect with each other, who build relationships with each other. You know, it's a community farm. We're doing this together. And I think one thing that I saw recently that I think intersects with that, someone shared with me, I guess, hashtag not a Venn diagram. Hayden, I'm like, what were those hashtags about? But it was because it was 3 circles. So it wasn't just the 2, it was like 3 circles. One was, I think the one was, what are you good at? Another circle was like, what gets you up each day? And another circle was, what's the work that needs to be done? And then at the center was, you know, the climate action that you can take, something like that. And so, you know, I think that's really like such a useful framework for this discussion is, you know, the food system is, it's a tiny part, you know, it's like, just like the climate crisis, it's huge and, you know, is going to come solutions to feed everyone and to care for the earth come from everyone, and come from everyone taking action. And so that intersection, so that we all know that we can make a difference.
Beautiful. Thank you. You know, I'm hearing each of you, and we already have one person who's raised their hand, and other folks will try and get to some others as well. But just a closing thought after kicking this off with you is, I tend to stay in my head, and I have, you know, sometimes issues are a little bit siloed. But what each of you have kind of been sharing with me, you know, we hear from Brian Stevenson in his book, Just Mercy, that one of the best things to do is to get proximate, right? Get close to people. And then in lots of folks in Jewish communities are talking about, you know, moving from membership to communities of belonging. And a lot of what you said, Hayden, it resonates for me. There's a thinker or organization kind of guru named Peter Block, who has a book called Community, The Structure of Belonging. And a big part of creating a sense of belonging is responding to people's needs, right? It goes back to what Dina's story about that other donor too, responding to people's needs and trying to transform our communities from places of consumers to places of citizens. ownership. That's something that I think is really interesting for all of us. Ali, is that your name? Did I say it right?
Yes.
Would you like to share your question?
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much. It was great seminar and great talks and very inspiring, especially Thanksgiving is coming and Christmas is coming. My question is, how can somebody get involved and help your organization? Because this is really great organization. I normally try to get involved with the Food Bank of the Rockies, but I wasn't aware of this, your program. And thanks to Barbara to send the email through Ollie program that we got to know about this. So how can somebody get involved? And also, do you guys have community garden that some people can come and help and do the gardening and the produce we share with the needy people? Thank you very much.
Who'd like to go?
I'll jump in real quick. I'm sure for all of us, if you, I know you can go to our website. I'm sure for all of us, you could go to our website and there are volunteer opportunities. We do have 27 community gardens around the community, and we are always looking for volunteers with a plethora of different skill sets. So whether you want to be outside gardening or inside sorting food or helping take orders from participants, I think all of us would welcome any volunteer help that you might have.
I love, because I do a lot of gardening and try to share my produce with some needy people, like fish organization in Broomfield and so forth. And also, so I love to do that. So I will go to your website and volunteer and get involved. Thank you very much. It's a great organization. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you folks have anything you wanted to add into that? No? Becca?
I'll mention, Hayden shared a slide of the Fresh Food Connect, like our produce, Boulder Food Rescue coming to pick up the produce that we grow at Milk and Honey Farm. And we have just about a 1/4 acre that we call our donation gardens here. And this past season, we grew and donated over 4,000 pounds of food on that 1/4 acre, which it like doubled from 2 years ago. And about half of that went to Boulder Food Rescue. And we have regular volunteer hours if people want to come out and help us in the dirt on Mondays and Thursdays from May through September, through mid-October. So those regular volunteer hours just ended, but that's really fun. And you get a chance to get dirty. We also, teach you about growing food. And we learn from each other as, the volunteers who come and meet each other, and we get to work with Boulder Food Rescue to make sure that our produce gets distributed thoughtfully.
Thank you very much. That's great information. I will sign up. Thank you.
I'll just one thing I was going to say, talk to Becca about farming. But maybe we could all put our websites in the chat and you all can definitely look us up. And similarly, we have lots of opportunities, volunteer opportunities. I did want to just also mention, we also put coolers at a lot of our different grocery program sites around town. So you can donate any excess produce to those coolers. And the idea is like, how do we, because oftentimes if you have a garden from your own backyard, you're probably not, depending on your size of your space, you might not be donating a lot. So driving it, kind of far can feel like a lot for 10 pounds of greens. So we try to distribute that out too, and just have coolers so you can drop it, harvest it right before the day they're going to distribute it out. So decentralizing that system keeps it a little fresher sometimes. So you can find that on our website too.
Thank you very much. So please put the website in the chat. Thank you.
We will be glad, they'll be putting in their websites, we'll be making the video available from our website for this program. That will be tomorrow, and we'll have links to their organizations too. Is there another question from the community, you can hit the reactions button on your screen, and you can hit the raise hand function. And if there's one more question, we can go to one. Otherwise, we'll go to our breakouts. Give a minute in case somebody needs to figure that out. The reactions button, if mute is all the way to the left, reactions just kind of in that same column, that same line, you're just going to go down.
Sorry,
No,
Rabbi, just one comment. Since you have the email of everybody, all the attendees, can you,
Yeah.
is it possible better, because chat will disappear at the end of the seminar. So if you guys
Yeah.
email those information, it would be
We'll
great.
be happy to do that too tomorrow.
Great, thank
Yeah,
you.
awesome.
Thank you, thank you.
Lynn, you can unmute yourself.
My favorite slide was Becca's leaf, the blow up of the leaf, because I'm passionate about energy efficiency and transactive energy and microgrids. And that leaf is just a template for microgrids. Just so neat. And also the idea of knowing, quantifying everything so that you have a feedback system, so you grow what you need and what the community needs, and how that would work for every aspect of our society if we did that. And that would bring us to carrying capacity, right? So it's like very thought-provoking things. I mean, things that I knew, things that we all know, right? You know, we really indigenously know these things, but rethinking it and processing it. And I wasn't raised Jewish, but I am Jewish by, you know, by my genetics, I guess, because it really makes sense to me. The deep thoughtfulness that all of you expressed, and I really appreciated it, especially the leaf, a simple leaf.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That's awesome. So friends, why don't we do the following? You'll have opportunities to introduce yourselves and connect with others. I'm going to open up breakout rooms, and you can choose which speaker you want to spend a little bit of time with. And we can be in those small groups just for some networking, from some sharing, exploring different possibilities. So as I open up the rooms, you'll be able to pick to be with either Hayden or Becca or Dina. And we have some other volunteers who are going to help out and just make sure that everybody has a chance to speak, and that no one person is doing all of the talking, and that we are going to make room for other people. And if you have something to share or ask, and you want to kind of narrow in with one of our friends here, that would be great. We hope that you'll go along and join with us. So I'm going to be starting those breakouts now. And you should be able to make your own choices of which room you want to go in. Yep, you're starting to figure it out. You're doing a great job, folks.
Rabbi, I'm not seeing where to click.
It didn't pop up on your screen?
Oh, there. No. I'm seeing a list of people, but I'm not seeing the breakout.
Is it in chat? Nope.
No,
I
you
didn't-
should have a window that pops up. Well, David, where do you want? Oh, I'm going to send you.
I see.
There you go.
Okay.
Oh, under breakout rooms?
Yes, breakout rooms.
Yeah, my bad.
That's all right. So the folks that are unassigned, if you're having trouble, you can unmute and I'll send you to it if you can't find your way. Daisy, where would you like to go? Hayden.
Hmm.
Lauren, where would you like to go? Or Lynn, where would you like to go?
I clicked on Becca, but it
Okay,
didn't.
that's where I'll send you.
Okay.
Stephanie, can I send you someplace? Or Lauren or Gerlinda? You're welcome to stay here with me. It's just going to be a little quiet.
Stephanie, I'll go. I'm Stephanie. I'll go with Becca.
Great. So Lauren and Gerlinda, if you want to just take a break, that's fine. And if you want to stay here with me, that's also fine. For those that are watching online, we broke up into groups and they are going to be coming back at about 12:20. Thanks for being with us.